Hi, I'm Tommy.
And I'm Ads.
And today we're talking about Colossal.
The new film starring Anne Hathaway and Jason Sudeikis.
Yes.
I say new. It's for rental. You can rent it now.
Yeah. And probably till the end of time.
No, just now.
I've never seen a film with Jason Sudeikis in before. And I thought I must have done because I knew the name so well. And I looked it up. And I haven't actually seen a film with him in. I've seen him on things, but I've never actually seen a whole film.
I've seen things with him in, but I'm going to say off the bat that this is the straightest I've seen him play, because he's a Saturday Night Live comedy guy.
Sorry, so the reason... sorry for jumping straight into that. But it was, I think it was something worth getting out straight away because in the UK, we don't get Saturday Night Live. A Saturday Night Live star doesn't directly translate to being a star over here.
And to be fair, I kind of thought he was Ed Helms.
Okay, that's fair.
Who is also a Saturday Night Live comedy American guy who looks a bit similar.
So, do you want to, if possible, give a brief plot synopsis?
Yeah, okay. So Anne Hathaway plays Gloria, who is a bit of a washed-up alcoholic who moves back to her hometown to get away after kind of a bad breakup. There she runs into Jason Sudeikis' character Oscar, who is an old school friend who runs a bar in the town. And at some point in the early game, a monster starts terrorising Seoul in South Korea, and she realises that it's her that is controlling the monster.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Now, what I will lead by saying is I think CGI has got us to a point now where it stopped being that annoying thing that let George Lucas ruin Star Wars and actually has become quite an interesting tool or useful tool for filmmakers to do interesting things with.
You mean because this suddenly, if you took it back 10 years, this looks like a much higher budget film than it actually is.
Yeah. I think this was fairly low budget film. I think
it's an indie movie, right?
15 million or something, so really cheap. This film would have cost there aren't that many scenes of the big monster terrorising Seoul, but the scenes that there are would have been the budget of a Roland Emmerich film in the 90s.
Yeah, Godzilla.
It is Godzilla, and it's really fascinating now that this stuff is cheap and accessible to independent directors that can experiment with them. Yeah. I think the first film that really struck me as doing that is the film Monsters, Gareth Edwards' film. He then went on to direct Godzilla, which uses these CGI monsters. I think the big story was that he did it on his laptop.
He basically photoshopped every frame, didn't he? Yeah. Or something like that. He photoshopped a monster onto every frame of the film. Yeah. And things like that.
But that was a really interesting indie drama about immigration and refugees. And then this year, have you seen A Monster Calls?
No, I haven't. The Liam Neeson voiced
Yes.
I haven't seen it. I heard good things.
Yeah, it is a really, really good film, I thought. And again, it uses a big CGI monster, but to tell a very small, intimate story about personal tragedy and childhood. There's also Okja, which is a new film on Netflix, written by John Ronson, which is about a big, giant CGI pig. But again, is a quirky comedy drama about vegetarianism. CGI pig would have been the entire budget of Independence Day if this was made 20 years ago.
The difference between getting the film made and not, I suppose.
Yes.
Because the point of this film isn't that there's a giant monster smashing around like South Korea. It's that it's a character drama set in a small town. Yeah. With that as a kind of nice kind of allegorical side to it. So
exactly.
Yeah, you're right. 10 years ago, you wouldn't have got it off the ground because what is this film? So I'm kind of glad that this film does exist because it can.
Yeah. So this film is essentially a film about alcoholism and alcohol, and then it goes into, and I think maybe we'll discuss a bit later, but it goes into a slightly darker place, which I think is fair to say. Yeah. But on the whole, is the monster is a metaphor for her under the influence of alcohol and becoming a monster, basically. But it does develop, but that's what the film is about. It isn't about a monster destroying Seoul. It's about Anne Hathaway's character. So I think that's a really interesting idea. And as you say, I'm glad it exists. And not just I'm glad this exists, but I'm glad that this tool now is available to interesting indie filmmakers. And it isn't just consigned to huge budget Marvel films. What I would say is I'm not sure personally whether this is totally successful in doing that.
Yeah,
But particularly compared to, as I mentioned, A Monster Calls, which I think is a really successful use of that CGI monster in a really effective, emotional way.
Yeah,
but,
to me, it was definitely flawed.
So it's flawed, but it's not flawed in its use of the blending the giant monster with reality. And in fact, that isn't where the problem is. The problems for me come much more from the human side of the story, which I think has tonal inconsistencies even before you get to the giant monster. I think Anne Hathaway is really good in this film. I think she's a really good actress anyway. I do like Anne Hathaway. And therefore, what I'm about to say isn't her fault. But she is not made by the filmmaker to be a convincing alcoholic. In the opening scene, she stumbles in to her partner's apartment, supposed to be really hungover, and she literally looks like she's walked off a catwalk. She looks like Anne Hathaway in full Anne Hathaway mode. She's performing really well, I think, but underneath Anne Hathaway, as they've presented her, and it's shot in a very clean, brightly lit rom-com way, which is how the film starts.
Yeah.
And I don't believe for a second that woman that stumbled into that apartment is hungover.
That is a problem that I have with not just this film, though. I think there's a massive problem in like most films where someone is portrayed as being an alcoholic, where because you obviously have to have like a Hollywood star in a role, they look great.
Yeah.
And she's like fully made up. And it's the same as, you know, if you think about, well, basically any film, but one that springs to mind recently is Gone Girl. And I haven't read the book, and I understand he's meant to be, Ben Affleck's character in Gone Girl is meant to be like a bit of a good-looking guy, but he's also meant to be a layabout alcoholic. But because at the time he was like bulking up to play Batman, he's just in such good shape that you'd need to be in the gym about 4 hours a day.
Yeah.
And it's like, I know people who are alcoholics and they all look like shit. Like nobody looks like Anne Hathaway. And it's a real Hollywood bugbear of mine that it's rare to get an alcoholic portrayed as an alcoholic who actually has the effects that alcoholism has.
And
I say this sitting here like drinking my wine and stuff. I look like shit.
Yeah.
But like,
we certainly look a lot worse than Anne Hathaway.
Anne Hathaway, yeah.
Yeah, you're right. And there's that classic American trope of an alcoholic means that you sit on your sofa with a single light beer.
Yeah, yeah.
Like you've got a Coors
so
Light
you've got
or
a real
Bud.
problem now. You need to get over this.
Because they've had 4, or they've bought a 6-pack from the shop. I think it is systematic of how alcohol is portrayed in Hollywood, but I think it was particularly jarring for me here because this is a film that is ostensibly a drama about the destructive nature of alcoholism. So you see it in the allegorical sense with buildings being smashed by this giant monster, but then when it cuts to the human side, there's a real disconnect because you don't believe that she is a monster in real life.
There is even a bit where she wakes up in one scene really hungover on like the floor because she's sleeping on the floor of her parents' house, and she wakes up really hungover and she's got like glossy lipstick and full makeup on and stuff, and that just seems like real naivety from the director's point of view to
and it's strange because he's an independent filmmaker. I think he's Spanish, and it was originally, he wrote the film as well, and I think it was originally going to be a much even lower budget film than it is, and I think Anne Hathaway came on board and I think she co-produced the film as well, so that obviously injected a lot more money and it gave the film a gloss, and I think that's fine. And also it was the tonal inconsistencies because it started out as basically a romantic comedy, or that's how it seems to be presented, and it's the tonal inconsistencies between the rom-com and the drama about alcohol that it develops into that I find more jarring than the contrast between the rom-com and the giant monster destroying soul. I actually could buy that one juxtaposition fine because it was an allegorical part of the story, but actually the development of where the story goes, and I'm not going to reveal it just yet, it doesn't earn, I think, the dark place that the film wants to go.
No, it definitely doesn't. So I guess we should talk about that. So spoilers from now, because the film is marketed as, she controls the monster. So that's, if you've seen a trailer, you know that that's the case. And it's marketed as a kind of quirky indie comedy where that's the main premise. But even then, it goes darker than you would think, even if we're sitting here going, it goes a bit darker than you would think, it still goes a bit darker than you would think. In the first kind of half the film is a story about alcoholism, then turns into one about abuse and emotional abuse as well, where Jason Sudeikis' character discovers that he can control a monster, which is a kind of giant robot that is in the same place, and they duke it out over the control of that power and the fact that he is a bit of a washout, you know, in the hometown, never left the hometown, and like suddenly having the power of being a giant robot in Seoul. But then it goes to a very dark place where he's kind of keeping a prisoner in the town. Maybe that's what you mean when you say it's not really earned, because it seems to come too far out of left field. Where at the start of the film, he's basically Mr. Nice Guy.
Yeah, and it wants to. That's a reveal. That's a twist, isn't it?
But it's not earned, because basically there is a sort of he's Mr. Nice Guy when they meet, and then him going sort of darker. I liked. But I liked it when they were both, the problem they both had was alcoholism, and his sudden like abuse of the power and his power over her seemed to not really come out of anything that was set up prior to that.
And I also think that's where the allegorical side of the story, you know, the monsters in Seoul, starts to fall apart, because I think it's a real shame, because you think they're going somewhere really interesting with this, and instead it just becomes quite a pedestrian plot point that never really hangs together, which is, if you leave, I'll smash up some buildings. Yeah. And the entire story of the monsters in Seoul just becomes that. That's the entire point, is that he will smash some stuff up if she leaves. And I think it's a real shame, because I thought that they were going to do something interesting of those two worlds colliding somehow.
Yeah, because if as it is in the film, he's gone from, there's a difference between being, oh, I'm a nice guy and suddenly I'm not a nice guy, to I'm a nice guy and I'm willing to mass murder like half of South Korea over you, which it was never fully established that he was like in love with her in the first place. It was just kind of, there was a tinge of it. Like, I'm all for a film kind of having a dark edge and a dark twist to it, but it never felt earned, and it just went too dark almost for what it wanted to be.
I think those flashback parts are a little bit of a missed opportunity as well, in terms of how the film ultimately resolves itself. Because one of the things that I really like about the resolution of the film is that it involves her and her strength, and she figures it out, and it doesn't rely on the men. You know, the nice guy boyfriend from the beginning, who isn't nice at all. He's actually a really horrible character as well.
Yeah.
There's a kind of hint that she's going to go back to him, but then she doesn't, and it's kind of an empowering ending, which is good. I really like that side of it. But the consistency of how she solves the problem by basically going to Korea and therefore making the monster appear, there's no way she would have known that would happen, and it just doesn't fit its own internal logic of the film.
Yeah.
And it doesn't resolve that emotional past, rather than, oh, the map falls upside down, so she goes, oh, I'm going to fly to Seoul and give that a go.
Yeah, and she basically, like, she's in Seoul, like, scooping him up, and he's in the park in America, and she can't see what is happening there, and so she's just like, I guess just like guessing, I'll just keep swiping, I got him.
What I thought was thrown away is the fact that when the military are shooting missiles at the monster, she feels it. She actually goes, ow, what was that?
Oh, yeah.
And so what had happened is, through these fights that they're having in the park, there's this big monster and robot having these fist fights in Seoul, and the monster, who's Anne Hathaway, becomes a hero, and the robot becomes the villain amongst the eyes of the general public. So I thought that they were sowing the seeds to actually, basically, the end is the Godzilla end, and basically this giant robot is destroyed by the military, like they nuke it or something, but not the monster, because she was the nice one, and essentially that kills the human Jason Sudeikis, because he's been abusive and he's been smashing up these buildings.
Yeah.
They destroy the robot, and by destroying the robot, they're just tussling in the park, and he falls down dead because he's just been nuked. And they were sowing those seeds, and then just went, no.
I even would have preferred, as an ending, and it's much simpler, if they'd just gone to that park and then they'd have had a scrap there, and because they're in the park, that's where the robot and the monster are fighting, and then she just won. Like, she killed him in the park, maybe, and then everyone in South Korea is going, hey, the robot was killed by the giant monster, the first half of the film, I really, really liked it, and it really devolved for me, and it got worse, and it was a massive shame because it could have been great, really great.
What I like about your suggestion is, compared to mine, is that it puts the ending in the power of Gloria, Anne Hathaway's character, which my one slightly takes that away, because actually that's one of the things I do like about the ending. But yeah, I think you're right. I think on the whole, I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the idea of it and where it was going. It just seemed slightly confused at what story the director was trying to tell.
Yeah.
That's not to say that actually I think Jason Sudeikis pulls off the darkness really well. I think the performances are good. I think he's quite good, and those scenes are actually quite horrible to watch. I think that's why they seem so dark.
Yeah, I actually thought he was great, and would like to see him do more dramatic stuff. And it's a shame because it is a curiosity, but it could have been more. There's something great living inside it that just wasn't really finessed.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
It's no Thor Ragnarok.
Well, maybe this will be the plot of Thor Ragnarok. Maybe Thor is just a guy who gets drunk and stumbles through a park and is Thor on Asgard.
Maybe that will be the reveal at the end of 200 Marvel films, that it's all just, he wakes up on a park bench. He's just been killing ants.
Well, it would make an easier way of recasting Robert Downey Jr. It's just Tom Holland's dream.